So I think you are gonna love this one, because this one is gonna be one that you are able to use better than I can. I didn't build this machine. I built this machine because I can't do the thing that I am going to describe without it. But someone who can do it without a machine can do it better if they have one strapped on. So what I'm saying is that this concept that I'm going to give you is in its infancy relative to your potential from my perspective, but it is at the maximum of my current potential to explain. So it has enough of a seed, I believe, to combine with what you could do with it to really, I don't know, do something incredible that I can't wait to see what it looks like.
Sounds good. The only bad news I have is that my wife scheduled herself to work today. So I've got all 4 kids. The 2 are
Okay,
inside, 2 are outside, and I'm in the middle.
I understand that you'll be roaming and frequently muting yourself to maintain order in your house. You will be present to the degree you are able, which has a proper view of priorities when it comes to monitoring children and listening to another person talk. So we're good, Tony. We're 100% on that one. I agree. I would disagree if you said anything differently.
Sweet. Are we expecting Duncan or?
I'm going to get started pretty soon.
Are we expecting Patricia or Matthew?
Well, Patricia's usually a Thursday night kind of gal. Matthew, I don't know. That'll be up to him. There might be some curiosity there. I put out a couple of blanket invites, but I'm just going to proceed as though everything is going on.
Gotcha.
Today's episode, I think, is going to be a lot of fun to anyone who likes martial arts. Because what I am going to do is I am going to give you the poor man's chi. I'm going to give you the chi that you can awaken through pure imagination. This is not a replacement for decades of training. This is not a substitution for having to go through what it means to really understand your body and develop it to do certain things. But what it does,
I'm gonna give you, and then
my
you cut
crescendo,
off. So I'm gonna switch you over to my phone.
my crescendo. I was crescendoing.
I cut you off right at. I'm gonna.
I'm not gonna get that crescendo back. I need to recapture my excitement. Yes. Okay. So this is not the chi that you could develop with a trained martial artist with decades of experience and the ability to combine verbal guidance and physical punishment, specifically designed to stimulate and unlock each of these in a very deep and very mapped out way. So this is not a replacement for that. But what it is a replacement for is you can strip away the mechanism that allows you to awaken parts of your inner chemistry at will, which is the fuel that becomes used wisely in a body that has been trained to make use of it. So that's where the disconnect happens, is you get the power source and you can do with it what you will, but you will not do with it more than you ever teach yourself how to do. But it is an improvement over not having that ability at all, because sometimes go harder is a good enough response. And if you know the sequence of mental techniques to go through, you can unlock the chemicals that make you go harder. And as long as you're picking good directions for when you activate these things, your body is going to listen to you because of the way your body understands information. So this episode is going to be how to communicate with your body in a way that will have the chemicals you need at a ready response. Meaning, if your body can produce it or release it, you can ask for it if you know how. and I'm going to teach you how to ask for it with examples. It's very formulaic. It's very simple. The process is childishly simple, which is what makes it so powerful. And it has to be because of our previous episodes. Remember, the mind-body connection. If you're going to use the survival circuits to do anything, which is martial artists 101, is you make everything reflex, then you need to have ways of understanding information that are that compact and that compressed. And that's kind of what I was talking about there. So specifically, today I'm going to be talking about a little bit of chi theory. Okay, I'm going to talk to you about what it means in the martial arts world. So this is not a Tom creation. This is a Tom checking his own work. This is a Tom having a theory and seeing what other people who have mapped what Tom thinks this is like have already said. So I can see where I agree without checking first, and where I have gone off track and why, and what I think the reason for that is. So it's a blind study, as it were. I build it and then I check it.
I feel like that is promising.
What's that now?
I said, I feel like that's promising.
It is. Oh, it's a great process. It never
I think
fails.
that is definitely closer to the road of, okay, so remember when you made the assumption, I'm not sure exactly how much of the Jester card you were playing at the time, but you said the assumption that people have to know the password to get to my knowledge, based on me saying they have to ask the right questions. But my purpose was just to say that people have to know what they want to know, or at least, I mean, everybody has their boundaries and whatnot, and I feel like this might be a different energy. That's the word that I'd use for it.
What I heard
this is a different energy space.
Let me check that, because I think I heard, if you say that my words describing this, I'm going to describe what I just heard, and you tell me if I've got it right. So say your last sentence one more time, like the process that I do, and then I'll respond to that.
All right. So what I was saying was that, or I had said, you said people need a password to get to my knowledge.
Yes.
But I said that people need to know
I'm back on
what
track.
they want to know.
Okay, so what that means to me is my knowledge is very compartmentalized and diverse and specific. So that would translate to needing a password would be the same thing as knowing precisely what you want. So like that's kind of, I see the inverse of that. Like I can provide it, but you have to know what it is that I have to provide. So that's the inflection point where those two vibes connect, is because you understand that you're part of the password, you're part of the exchange, so you have to do your part. And that's where the self-honesty comes into play, where someone could say, I'm asking for this, but the person says, okay, which flavor of that do you mean? What do you mean, which flavor? It's only this way, or that. That's kind of, so the deeper you get, the more specific the password becomes. And people will tell you what level of specificity they need by what boundaries they put around their original thought. Like whatever scale they are thinking, that is the maximum possible scale, and then you set everything from there. So that is why a first boundary is necessary. And if you're trying to zero in on something, you just need to be able to say closer to or further away from than before. And you use your original position relative to that. That's kind of all that works. A little bit off topic, but yeah, that's a direct, like that's the way I understand that connection. And it's very similar to the way I think it's the same thing. It vibes the same, it vibes in both directions from a polarity perspective. Yeah, it harmonizes discordantly.
Yes, to that tangent. Now let's bring it back.
Yep.
And see if we can keep it.
Yes. So I'm going to keep going then. The chi. All right, chi. So if we're going to talk about chi, it's the 5 elements theory. Okay, and this is a Chinese way of understanding the body. You've got your fire, earth, metal, water, and wood. And I'm not going to go into too much detail, but these have been deeply mapped in the body to physical systems that correlate to physical experiences, meaning these metaphors are directly relevant and a useful way of dividing up the different things that can happen in the body. It's one of these 5 disciplines. If you look at the disciplines this way, and disciplines have boundaries, and the boundaries have relationships. So that way you can find where you are on this map. And so when they talk about the 5 elements, that would be where people start, if they start anywhere at all. If you're doing a metaphor of consciousness, like I am this, you have this one specific identity, and you don't really know what that means. But you interact with all of these other different identities, these different elements. And through that interaction, eventually you gain knowledge of all of these elements and learn how to work them together. And that is where you get your first sense of self. And then from there, you find the self and the other self, the shadow and the whatever. They have a version of that. And then from there, it's about transcending that unification. And eventually the path ends at the void, which is just the lack of anything that doesn't make total and perfect sense. So that's the map of chi as it goes through consciousness. So those maps are the same thing. So anyways, I've got this a lot of examples here. So I want to get right to it. So when I say, I got to cover the definition. So the name of this lecture is Accessing the Subconscious Emotional Switchboard and Learning How to Control that. And then the subset of that is Learning to Reprogram the Subconscious. So both of those are 2 different ways of titling this lecture. One of them is Learning to Reprogram the Subconscious. If you look at it from a subconscious perspective, that is what everything is in relative to. So I'm doing this lecture in 2 different mental languages at the same time, is what I'm saying. There are 2 different perspectives that are equally valid that you can watch this lecture from and get 2 different results that are directly linked to each other by following this singular path. So the first one is, all right. So when I talk about the cheese and the emotional switchboard, all of that stuff, reprogramming the subconscious, you could say, what does it mean? What is the subconscious? What is the reprogramming? And that's a relevant lecture. The second one is accessing the body's emotional switchboard. That is a different lecture which talks about using mechanisms within the body in specific ways and mimicking them to produce a specific result. You press the button, you get the piece of cheese. I show you where the button is, I show you how to find the button, how to build it, and how to ask for the cheese. So there's 2 different ways. The reason I speak this lecture in both of those languages at the same time is because this is a perfect example of the internal process of reprogramming the subconscious. So while you can go through the exercise and experience the benefit of the exercise, I want to make it clear that this process can be taken and be used to reprogram your subconscious to do anything else. So I am teaching you the programming language that your subconscious mind understands. This is the computer code that I've found that seems to work. So that is why I say, not only pay attention to the example to get the result, but pay attention to what the example is doing and what it is targeting and where it is directed. And then you will be able to grab that function and put it to some other application that matters more to you. So you can get the benefit of this example and learn how to make your own examples, which will be more useful to you in the future. So a tool building tutorial is what this is in that sense, etc. Okay, so let me jump right into it. The emotional control switchboard. So that's a term that I made up to simplify a complicated idea. All right, so imagine the complexity of your human anatomy and emotions is like the representation that I think it was Pixar did when they made the movie Inside Me, or Inside Out. It was the movie where you have the little girl and she's living her life as an adolescent and trying to deal with memories, and then most of the story is inside her head, where it's the interaction of like her depression and her fear and her rage and all of that. And it's, they have to go and rescue the memories, and they have to visit the subconscious land, and they have a fight with the shadow, and all of these things that are very much in tune with the way the mind works.
The hero's journey.
Exactly. So it takes all of that complex thing and simplifies it to, if you understand this sufficiently, you can reduce certain aspects of this with relevance to a switchboard and say, you take as an example that the idea that you can build a switchboard that is simple: anger, happy, sad, chilled out, what max and relax, and all cool, shooting b-ball, outside of school, when you're up to no good. You take your pick, but you can build your own switchboard, which is why I'm speaking very broadly. So I don't want to put a limitation on this that doesn't exist. I used it to map my emotions and gain control of that. If you have specific states of mind that you enjoy, you could build a button for them and learn how to recreate them at a moment's notice. So here's the core truth that I have found, and I am the person to find it, because number one, I've never had it, and number two, if I learned how to build it, that means I found something that's very deeply ingrained in our biology, something that is ingrained enough that I could pass on, because that is how it's activated. It uses the body's survival systems to run this complicated machine, and it uses those systems in creative ways, which is what these martial arts guys train to bring that state of mind out. That is what this chi training is. These guys aren't just punching logs and doing backflips. There's a spiritual education that is part of their techniques. And I don't mean a spiritual education in terms of an indoctrination. I don't mean a mystical education. I mean a inner spiritual journey, meaning how you perceive your own spirit is the thing that is challenged. And that is what I mean, a spiritual journey. And that is the thing that a teacher needs to grow inside the student, if that student is to ever have a chance of surpassing their current self. I would say in the martial arts world, teaching the one who had no access to the body's incredible potential through self-actualization is the greatest.
I think that was a golden nugget. I think
What's
that was
that?
a golden nugget. Can you repeat that last point?
Well, how big was the nugget?
Nuggets are small, but they're very important.
Not to a mouse.
Say what?
I said not to a mouse. Did get nothing to a giraffe.
I saw Ratatouille.
So what was the nugget?
It was about unlocking. It was about teaching.
Yes. The unlocking the spiritual prisons of people, the self-actualization that is transferred from one man to another. That is the master's reproduction of spirit and soul. In a sense, that is his validation, nothing else. To know that he did the thing he was trying to do and have confirmation of it before his eyes. That's incontrovertible. A sense of reflection. Like you can say, I did it right. This thing I believed was true, and I trusted it when I didn't know if it was, and that becomes the comforting moment after the storm. But anyways, so that's the way I'm speaking about this. So I'm going to use emotions as examples, and I'm going to use specific chemicals in the body as examples. But remember that what I'm talking about also applies to muscle memory. So let me give you an example, a very brief example of how to use it for muscle memory. Any series of specific movements that you can understand deeply enough to give a unique name, you can build a button for. make it creative, make it memorable. The idea is to compress the entire idea down to the simplicity of a single word or title, and the entire concept is instantly transferred. That's how you build the muscle memory button. You can rewind this because this piece of advice will make more sense after I use more programming metaphors, but that is a coding language specific reference that I just gave. So use the rewind button as many times as you need. All right, so the emotional switchboard. All right, so let me give you an example of what I mean. And I'm gonna describe the way that people experience the world. All right, so I'm speaking very broadly. And so when I say this, I can very broadly say that human beings go out and experience the world in ways that feel real to them, especially in the moment. The world that is right in front of them feels real. And that's because we, on a large degree, come to trust what our senses tell us. We're not going to walk into a wall or trip and fall down a hole, or you know, we're going to be close enough that the people around us agree we are also close enough. So there's a physical, orientational sense of validation going on, is what I'm talking about. So when I talk about how we experience things, that's reality and a default state in the moment. You're just living your life, right? You're not thinking about what reality is. You're just being inside it. And boom, something happens. And it happens instantly. And you have a response, and that response is almost as instant. You did that without thinking about it. You did it by accident. Which means something specific happened that made you do it by accident. Which means you can learn to reproduce the thing that made you do it by accident. You can learn how to, one, never do it by accident again, because you don't know what the hell is going to happen if it just goes off every time. And number two, you learn the benefits of when having it go off is the right answer when it feels like the exactly wrong one. You'll have the perspective to know the difference, to be able to make what on the surface appears to be an easy decision, but is actually a deeper judgment call. That's kind of the level of perspective I'm talking about with that. So people believe that what they see is real enough, and they react to it in ways that make them have emotions. And those emotions produce floods of chemicals and reactions. So now let me talk about something else. So that's a self-contained fact. This is Exhibit A. All right, so put Exhibit A in a bubble over here. People believe that their reality is real enough to experience it with emotions. Bubble. Second idea, second concept. Human beings are creatures of simulation and imagination. And it's a blend of them at all times. Whatever simulation you have that is correct unifies with reality around you, and whatever does not match is created with imagination instead, whether it's good or bad, or leads to self-destructive or irrational consequences. So be it. That's just the way it goes. So because we have a sufficient percentage of our current reality already being constructed primarily of imagination, that means you can use the imagination to put things in places that will be useful to you, like power-ups in a video game. When you know what the right answer is, but your body doesn't seem to want to cooperate, but now you know the right way to ask. It's a password game, sort of, but it's also knowing the right way to ask, to unify with a larger point, which it took me a moment to get there, but I got there and I didn't miss a step. So that this is the moment where that idea becomes crucial to bridging the gap. between possible and impossible, because you have to realize that how much you believe is not part of your imagination is probably a much smaller number than you say it is. Like you have way more imagination than you say is filling in the way you understand the world. The percentage is biased in your favor to look more wise. In terms of knowing the ratio of understanding to not understanding a specific thing, like the assumption of ignorance is not properly weighted. It's present, but it's not properly weighted, et cetera, et cetera. So what this means is when you realize that's true, then you can start to feel the difference between imagination and reality. Why? Because you're looking at both of them now. You have been for a while, when previously you just accepted it. So then you can start to see, well, that's not a seething pile of chaos that is to be avoided. It's eddies of order amidst the deeper sea of chaos that doesn't make sense, but the amount of chaos gets smaller. And the stability that was invisible becomes revealed as the process descends and then unwraps, because it's a process, a harmonic process, like lowering of notes on a musical scale. It's the guided tour of every flat, sharp bend and crescendo. That is the informational journey. So those are my initial conditions, that we can imagine whatever we want, because we already imagine whatever we want more than we think we do. If I were to sum it up in one sentence. So because that is true, and because my first thing is true, what that means is, if you have felt it once in your life, you can learn how to feel it right now. And here's how. So that is the scope of the promise that I am making, right? It's a measurement. That is why I'm spending a lot of time on this. The scope of this measurement is every feeling that you have ever had, every feeling you have personally experienced, that you can remember, is a feeling you can learn to experience right now. So that's the scope of the promise. Now here's the method. Here's the how, all right? So the first thing you have to do is you have to remember the time you felt that way. You have to recreate the scene in your mind. But you have to do more than just go through it. You have to put yourself in the moment. You have to remove yourself from hindsight and say, I'm going to pay attention to this memory like I only knew then what I knew then. How would I feel differently than I am watching it from a hindsight perspective now? But by creating the proper perspective of subjective fear and lack of information, and what choices would have been made if better information had been available. So what you do is you recreate that moment as accurately and honestly as you can, trying to live it as it was experienced in that moment. So essentially what you're doing is you are summoning that memory, because number one, that is how memories are summoned. You think of a time, you think of a feeling, and let the details come. You think of a time, you think of a feeling, and you let the details come. That is how you remember 101. Auto-tune that shit. All right. Like it needs at least another verse and some chorus girls or something. I don't know. I don't know very much about making it flashy, but that will be auto-tuned.
It's fine for TikTok.
So that's how you summon the memory. Now, here's how you use it. Right? So that's how you get there. That's how you reach the thing that you need. That's directions. It's step one. So you gotta have a memory of the feeling. You gotta have it specific. All right. So once you have that specific memory, now you can do step 2. Step 2 is to relive the memory slowly, in detail. Don't try to remember it. Try to watch it. Don't try to direct the remembrance. Try to observe it. Meaning, you need to put yourself in an objective state of mind. You can only judge yourself for what you remember if you feel shame about what you shouldn't be trying, what you're trying to remember. Otherwise, there'd be no reason not to try to not remember of something. If there's some sort of thing there that you're ashamed to think about. But that's the answer. Every time, every single time, that's the answer. So you do that. So that's because here's why you do that. Because now your body is in the proper perspective sensory state to recreate the emotion you're trying to remember, meaning your emotions are a product of your environment. So your environment is giving you signals that tell you how to respond. So what I am doing is, for this mental exercise to work, you need to first calibrate your entire sensory experience physically to match exactly what was going on in that moment. So you recreate the data surrounding your environment to provide your senses with what they need to know. So that's why step 1 is crucial. And then step 2 is to let go and pay attention and let the memory unfold. And then the only thing you need to pay attention to is, how did I feel? Because what you've done is you've created the stimulus, you've created the response. So now you can objectively, which is the difference between you now and you then, you can objectively measure the emotion as it changes, because that's what you're measuring, and you've made sure your memory is accurate. So what you're doing is, that is how you take a signature of your own emotion. You have to watch it happen from an objective stance and be experiencing empathy with yourself enough to physically recreate your state of mind, which is feeding your sensory data, which is what we do all the time anyways. How much of what is around you right now is filled in with filler nonsense that doesn't exist or even closely mimic reality? It's white noise because you don't know what to do. You have learned how to sort out enough true things to not crash into a wall. The amount of filler that is in your perspective is vast. That's the human condition. So what this does is it shows you how to strip away some of that white noise. And that is, realize you can create whatever sense of understanding about your environment that you want. And if you are clever with how you do that, you can create memories where you've experienced pure examples of very cut and dry emotion that are genuine enough that you can say, that is exactly what I want when I'm representing myself. That is not a corrupt version of it. That is not a self-destructive version of a thing. That is not ugly. That is a pure moment where I was experiencing that feeling the right way. That's the things I target, because then I can experience that moment and give it power by giving it the data that I had. I just make it feed in on itself. I give it what it had before. I just provide that with my imagination, instead of having it provided to me by the world around me. The mind doesn't care. The mind wants to be fed. The mind wants to be useful. The mind wants to do a good job. And the mind often has to do that alone. It makes these decisions for you in the moment without full understanding by you or direction from anyone else. So if the mind is a separate consciousness, the thing that monitors this, which it is, and it shares a connection with you physically, which it does, and it shares an interest with you in mutual survival, which it also does, then it would make sense that your body has things that it wants to do for you that you have no idea how to figure out if you don't try to make the attempt at converting the different languages mentally. So that's what all of this exercise was how to cut through the translation step by step, find a memory. So this is how to do it by rote. This is how to do it on faith. If it doesn't make sense, just go through the steps. It will get you to the end result. And then when you have the end result, all of the steps will make sense, which is the way that the information was originally found out, by the way. So the reason the information is difficult is not because the information is difficult. It is because you are following the opposite direction than the one who wrote the path out. So it's like doing a marathon running backwards. It's possible. You'll get there. It will take you longer. It'll be weird. But here's the thing. If you have the stamina to do it that way, you can get there. As long as you don't chicken out and stop running. Once you pick a direction, you have to go until you reach your original starting point again, wherever that path takes you. So that is the power of imagination. So that is the core ingredient, is how strongly can you believe yourself? So imagination has a core component of strength with ego, meaning whatever math that, whatever math that ego and, what was the other term I was using? I just had it. I lost my translation.
Self-awareness, consciousness, pride,
Um,
confidence,
There
chi.
was Chi, maybe. Yeah. Let's go with that. That's close enough. That's close enough. So the ability that a person has to believe their own memory, yes, their confidence and ego share the equal measurement of strength. So confidence is one thing, ego is another thing. How strong confidence is how strong ego is as well. So that's where that conversion comes from. That was the math connection I was missing. So yes, Tony.
So I'm glad I didn't pause it earlier because I was a little bit busy with the kids earlier.
Yeah.
But since we circled back a little bit to memory, I
Memory
don't
is the
believe we
front
can trust
door.
our memory. Yeah, I don't believe we can trust our memory.
No, that doesn't matter. The
Well,
point is,
you.
I mean, it doesn't matter for the terms of this trick, meaning because you can't trust your memory, you can make it do exactly what you want, which is what this trick is using. It's not a disproof of your beliefs about memory. It is an exploit of the system that benefits the user by allowing you to create a desired input and get an exactly formatted and predictable response. So it's learning a hacking language that takes advantage of some of the flaws that you're saying are downfalls. It makes a positive from a negative. Yes, it makes a positive from the negative that you're pointing at it correctly. Yes, this is not guaranteed. There's lots of risks. Memory is unreliable. It's filled in with the same amount of nonsense that you fill everything else with. So your memory only contains as much reality as you were able to measure at once. Everything else is filler. So what reality and what parts of reality you choose to pay attention to will determine what percentage of your memory is filled with nonsense and what percentage is not. I would say, yeah, not everybody has the same memory.
I'll take that.
All right, cool. See, this is how now we're starting to reach the similar translations of this. This is a very universal language. So let's talk about what I mean by doing this as an exercise, and I'm going to try and guide you through it. So if you're watching this, I need a little bit of trust in terms of my influence on your internal vibe. I need for this to feel accurate, for this to be an accurate conveyance of information. I need to know that your vibe is one of calm and trust, and that if I take it for a ride, you'll let me go there and trust that I'm not going to take it anywhere that it shouldn't. But the transition is the thing I'm trying to recreate by tone. So that is what I'm asking for the trust of focus to be on, is to let yourself attempt to empathize with my current tone, and let me take it in a few directions just to show you what I mean about the way this sort of thing behaves. So I'm assuming that you're able to do that. Take your deep cleansing breath and just kind of let the voice do the talking, and I will provide the proper emotional cues to take us through a memory. The memory of when I had to walk to the store. I was about 10 or 12 at the time. It's hard to remember these things. And I walked there alone. And I wasn't the most popular boy, but I had walked this way a bunch of times before. Didn't think anything of it. And some kids came along and now they threatened me. And I was small and I wasn't able to defend myself, and there was this panic. And my throat began to get just a little bit tight. And the kids were giants above me. And I could feel my heart beating into my ears. And I couldn't even hear them talking anymore. And that's as far as that exercise is going to go. And now I'm bringing everything, all of that energy is coming back down to the normal speaking level where everything is. That was just an experience, like a gentle wave. So the wave is over. How that wave experience was for you is the only thing that is living in you now. So make peace with the experience. If it was positive or negative, just remember that it was stable enough that you survived unharmed. And learn how to do that in anticipation. And the next time you won't even feel the wave happen at all, because you'll have already understood it well enough to make it a part of you. So what that was an exercise in summoning anxiety, which is the emotional fight and flight center. A sharp enough anxiety at a high enough speed triggers adrenaline, triggers neuroepinephrine, it triggers opiates, it triggers a lot of things. That shit makes you a messed up PCP version of yourself. And that is how those monks do some of that crap. Number one is they have access to their body's full potential of locomotion in terms of chemical necessity. And then through training, they provide the durability for the body to withstand such a ferocious assault. So to use these techniques that I am talking about, this is a good thing for me to mention, actually. You can use these techniques that I am talking about to make yourself immune to pain. You can use these techniques I am talking about to make yourself physically more capable in the moment. You can use these techniques that I am talking about to surpass your limitations that you have experienced for your entire life, at least when those limitations were psychologically applied. So this removes the psychological limitations of what you can do with that energy. It does not replace the causal effects of your body's durability in its current state and its ability to adapt itself slowly to a different state over time. Meaning, you could have both. You can't have both just because you have one. You still have to pay the price of getting the other. As much as it took you to learn what you know now, there is an opposite side to that you can go back to and spend the same amount of time or less learning it again from the other side, giving you not a 100% increase in power, but because of how you can triangulate information, giving you an entire dimensional perspective of power instantly for every one of those experiences that you can map that you haven't mapped before. Using the math and inference. So anyways, I'm talking about how to do that. So if you can imagine how you felt and you are honest about how you felt, you can recreate a narrative inside you and visualize it strongly enough that your current body believes it now. Or with the way that I think about it, this is not fooling the body. I want to be clear. This is not a deception. This is a communication. Because you have to look at the way the body understands information. The body does not understand your visual processing.
Where do you draw that line?
Wait, what?
Where do you draw that line between deception and communication?
Well, I'm explaining
one
it
of
right
the
now.
things. Oh, okay, cool. I was thinking about acting a whole lot during this, and I was like, well, there's some good acting techniques. And but go on, you got it.
Yeah.
You got the vibe.
So yeah, so the difference is, so I want to make it clear that it's not a deception of the body. It's a communication of the body, because to view it as a deception is a subjective judgment made on the nature of the request before it happens. It's a moral judgment that is made, which means that certain methods of communication have been ruled invalid from your perspective as dishonest, etc. However, from the perspective of the body, which is your vagus center, your primitive cluster, your sensory nerves, they don't understand the visual cortex. They don't have one. They only understand sensation, which means this type of communication can be modified to become a version of tap once for yes, tap twice for no. It means that this is what happens when the world is around me. I'm doing my job by keeping you safe because you're not paying attention to anything. However, just because that relationship exists all the time doesn't mean that a healthy partnership can't be formed, where you say, shave and a haircut, and the body says, good day. And there's your power up. Why? Because you knew how to ask nicely in words the body could understand, that made the messages small enough for them to use the primitive survival circuits, which means all the doubt has to be stripped away. But that's how it works, and that they teach that in martial arts by beating the crap out of you until you're too tired to not understand it that way. They diminish you mentally by punishing you until the ideas that you're capable of having are small enough to fit inside your own head from both directions. That's what martial arts does from a mental toughening perspective. It compresses you. It forces you to compress because you need to be better, stronger, faster. Everything is not enough. It's too much wasted movement. There needs to only be this or that or the other. All decisions need to be instant. That is martial arts. That is what they train, which is a mental replica of what I am describing as a mathematical reductive process. And I've just gone through the way to do that. You remember, you visualize, you relive, you capture, boom, imprint, and the body responds. So if you've ever been in a fight, there's a lot of feelings that surround a fight, which is why fights are memorable, which means you have access to a lot of different things all at once. You have access to the anxiety, if there was any, before it happened. Maybe somebody had a weapon. Maybe it was very scary. Maybe you wanted to run and you couldn't. So if you can remember how you felt, you've got a perfect, pure moment of reactionary anxiety that's not being clouded by anything because it's so strong, it's got 100% of your attention. Then maybe the fight starts and you don't have a choice and you decide, okay, I can't be a pacifist. I have to let go of these normally morally acceptable behaviors that would make me never throw fisticuffs against anyone and say, well, it's him or me because he has made that choice and I haven't. And I don't like either of those choices very much, but if it's him or me and he's asking, I'm going to pick me. And he's going to ask better than I am for me to make him get that choice that he wants. So then you have everything that happens there. You have the heart pounding adrenaline. You have the excitement of the uncertainty. If you felt that you were right, and you had anger fueling whatever you were doing, that's an experience all of its own. When you are right and you are angry, that is human jet fuel, if you can have that memory. If you can remember pure, unadulterated, righteous rage, that is human Red Bull. That is a button you want. because that is the button for full power. Now, where you point that, I want to be very clear. Look at what happens when you point things where you do now. Measure how often that turns out poorly, and measure how often that turns out well. If on average, or even on reliable occasion, things turn out poorly for you, I recommend withholding the use of these techniques until you can fix that first, because things that you make better will flourish over time. The things that you make worse, you will instantly destroy. So you need to be aware of your current standing perspective on this, because if you do it wrong, you will break things that used to be strong enough to handle you. And that's not a good thing when it's done by accident. You become an unstable person. You become a threat to yourself and others in the mind of the one who just saw something they probably would rather have not seen, which is a lack of control over a large power, which is exactly what happens if you use these and you are not in as much control of them as you believe yourself to be. So that's the warning. Beyond that, I don't show a need to withhold this knowledge. But just know that it can ruin your life if you do it wrong. And it's not my fault. Probably because your life was already ruined before you got here to try and turn it around, so bravo. Or maybe you're just a curious son of a bitch and I'm a right bastard for making all these imaginary stories about you. But you gotta remember, the subjective audience who might exist one day appreciates these imaginary tales as allegories and narratives where they can inject themselves to relive specific fantasies into 1 second hero's journey metaphor. It's sort of like decorating the walls with hero's journeys. It's like, all right, well, I've said everything I'm done about that. Let me do a little hero's journey here. It's like the happy little tree version for me, because I'm just going to put a happy little metaphor here to really drive my point home. And so when I'm talking about the emotional switchboard, the map of the 5 elements is a very good map. For what the map of 5 elements is a very good idea of relevance. I hate that some of my things are starting to rhyme now. I don't really know what to do with that, but I don't believe that fundamental truths rhyme, but I'm learning to speak in rhyme now, and it's happening more more as I go. It's happening more as I go. All right, so let's talk about the different types of emotions. And looks like I got the wrong one. I had a graphic here that labeled these quite nicely for me and gave me the relevant connections. Yes, here it is. Here it is. Okay, so I'm going to talk about the 5 elements when it comes to chi. And I'm going to tell you that these are the 5 buttons on your emotional switchboard that you can build using these concepts. So you can make your own buttons, you can learn your own things, but these are the ones that other people have been made, and here's how they made them. And they work the same in every human who has a central nervous system and body chemical abilities to communicate with themselves or hormones. So here's number 1, it's anger. And there are different states of anger, just like there are different states of joy. So to understand anger from a chi perspective is to be able to mentally recreate a small anger and a slightly bigger one and a slightly bigger one and a slightly bigger one, and so on, in a controlled fashion, all the way up to a maelstrom of biblical and universe sundering proportion. And that is what it means to master the chi of anger, because your body is capable of experiencing those levels of anger. So by learning to visit them consciously, and here's the thing, while remaining in total control, while remaining relaxed. You cannot let the fuel burn the vessel, is what they say. You have to learn how to do it right. There are safety protocols, internal safety protocols, baggage that you need to move out of the way. You are transporting liquid hot magma. If you leave anything in its path, that is your fault. And if it burns you, you are going to cry out. That is how you know you did it wrong. So this is the teaching, more or less, of how to do that. I'm really bastardizing it. A proper martial arts master would take decades to do this. These are just the broadest of strokes for those who are only casually interested in giant scale things. That is the first one of chi is to activate your anger, and your anger produces all of your fighting chemicals. So as you learn to visualize and empathize and recreate these different scales of anger, you can summon from them sufficient quantities of adrenaline, of pain-killing, chemicals, of things that make you, go, 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 go. Your body has a specific system for that, and this is the way to ask to turn it on. Hulk smash is pretty much that. You don't have to be mad. That's the thing. If you've got baggage with being angry, that anger is always wrong, too bad you can't use this then. Too bad you turn your survival system off even when you should have it. That is on you. That is not anybody else. This is a tremendous advantage of human perspective, and there's no reason to elevate such a rejection of that understanding of yourself to the point of a virtue where it is religiously avoided at all costs. That is to reject, that is to use a religious argument or an ideological argument like that anyways, is to criticize the God that made you the way that you are. So either you are smarter than God when you reject that part of yourself as a potential, or I don't know what, man, but that's you fill in that blank, because that's the only one I see. You tell me how that's wrong. I want to know. I'm accusing you. Defend yourself or don't. But the next one. Okay, so anger is a tricky one for some people, but it's there. Joy. All right. How much joy do you have in your life? How many joyful memories can you summon? Can you just have a little joy? What, like a tiny, tiny amount of joy? What's the smallest joy you can imagine that still counts as joy? Is it an almond joy? That's a good measurement for some people. Like, if you don't have a measurement that's standard, start with an almond joy. However much joy an almond gives you is 1 unit of joy.
I've got this for myself, and you might appreciate this insight.
Okay.
So it's an indifferent unless.
Indifferent unless. Wait a minute,
yeah.
hang on. I need you to promise me to give you the math for the almond joy conversion when this is done. Because then I won't lose that thought. The almond joy conversion. Okay, go.
I'll remember almond joy.
Okay, that'll be enough.
But I was just saying, you said the smallest level of joy. But that's easy for me because it's an indifferent unless. It's because indifference is neutral. Indifference is not joy nor sadness. Indifference is
what's the opposite of indifference?
not wanting it to be either. Caring.
What's that?
Caring or wanting or being invested in or wanting to be invested in.
Okay.
So indifferent unless, indifferent unless is the smallest amount of joy, because it says, well, this could be a good thing if there's any reason for it to be.
So it's not the exact,
but
so it's not the theoretical zero amount.
Yeah, it's not indifference, it's wanting it to be joy. It's
so that's how you
that's
measure
the smallest amount.
Zero and not zero.
Yeah.
That's a very, I want to say that again because I really want to make sure that's right. Because that is a very useful.
I'll give it back to you another way too, and this is exactly why I thought you'd like it. You said, "What's the smallest amount of joy?"
Down the one we just found. I'm asking you to slow down. I've seen a tool of enormous potential, and I don't want to just throw it on the ground. I want to package it up nicely and put it in a box because it's yours and it was beautiful. So fuck, what was I saying? I spent too much energy trying to get.
So So the thing is, we're on the same vibe, and I'm trying to help you go where you're trying to go.
No,
I think
I
this is
want to
one of
go
those
where you were
moments.
going because I was building a tool and I
Yeah,
needed
exactly. Yeah.
Okay,
And
I got
I've got your tool. I've got your
Okay, so
tool.
the
It's
difference-
indifferent unless.
So
It's indifferent unless. So my thing is, I
no,
put
we
the
both
energy
got going
for it to be
first.
joyful.
Say your words, and I'm not going to talk. Your words were
Indifferent unless. The smallest amount of
Indifferent.
joy is not caring if it's joy or not, but I know I want it to be joy more so than everything else. So I'll invest the minimum amount of energy and acknowledge that as the smallest amount of joy, being indifferent unless. If there's
Perfect.
another energy that's willing for that to be joyful, then it's joyful.
Yep. So what you're doing is saying that indifference is 0 measurement, and joy is anything that is not 0 measurement.
The smallest amount of
Yep.
joy
Yep.
is
Yep.
the saying not 0
Exactly.
measurement.
Yep. So that's how you tell the difference between 0 and not 0. So that's a very useful conversion. That's the moment where the road, that's your
Let's
smallest
rephrase
measurement.
that last sentence to just, you said that's how I tell between 0 and not 0.
Yeah.
Let's phrase that, let's change that, because that's not my problem. You're a nanotechnologist.
No,
and
what I'm saying is that's the tool I needed to put in the box. That's a Tom tool.
Yes, and that's it. I just wanted to let you know that for me, it's not 0 and 1. For me, that's a Tom tool. So
yes, it was. It was very useful.
yes,
I needed the moment to package it right.
Yep. Now, of course, I want everything to be positive, but that's not the same thing here. This is indifferent unless. This is, I know I don't care, or I know I don't want to care, but I have already devoted the energy enough, or I've already acknowledged its proper potential, which is not just, everything can be good. It's I see that this has many ways it could be good, but I don't care enough about it for it to really be good for me. So it's not 0, but I know it.
Well,
and it's
that would be that would fit. That would still fit within my definition of the difference between 0 and not 0. Because
yes, but for me, that's why it's a Tom's tool.
Yep.
That is completely unnecessary for me, because I know if it's 0 and I know if it's not 0. And usually when it's not 0, it's not on the micro scale. When it's not 0, I know it's not 0.
Your hands are too big to use my micro tools.
What?
I said your emotional hands are too big to use my micro tools.
So I'm going to do the opposite of Doctor Strange, and I'm going to have tiny hands when I use my chaos magic.
Yes. Like your magic. So what you would do is you would turn each of your hands into each of your fingers into a separate hand.
Just like when he was in that.
And then each of them would be doing magic. That would be the. We need to do that.
And I saw the potential for that 0 and not 0, because I was like, wait a second, that sounds familiar. I've mapped that already. It's indifferent unless, and I call it indifferent unless. Like that's a conscious mental my thing. Like it's indifferent unless.
That was a good.
And I have a million of those for my wife, and she hates them.
I can see it how it has 2 different explanations for the asymptotic nature, which is what you describe in terms of caring or knowing, like caring to avoid versus not caring at all. That's the measurement that I see is relational. But you say
weaponized ignorance.
They are.
Weaponized ignorance is not indifference. Weaponized ignorance is saying I don't want to know this. Yeah. So
which is how I'm at. That's how I'm
That's the opposite of that.
Maybe
that's the opposite of that little joy. The minimal sadness, or the minimal opposite of joy is weaponized ignorance.
So let me talk about that was a mistake that was, if you want to call it to a mistake, or if you wanted to upgrade your cloaking system. What you call it
cloaking system, but for me it's just honesty.
What I'm saying is that it was very hard to find you the way that I understand, because at your core you resist being understood the way that I find things, which was the dance. But the thing that revealed your position, from my perspective, was you had too many examples of weaponized ignorance where I learned how to trace it back to the source. Because weaponized ignorance goes away from, but if I can rewind time, it also goes back towards. And that's what I did. So all of your different angles, which were infinite, were not I didn't need infinity to find the source. I just needed a sufficient number to triangulate, which was a large number because of how well you understood this process, and it seemed to be your natural response. But that was eventually what led to the pattern recognition, was the continued engagement.
Something else that you said before, you said natural to something else about this whole concept before, but I don't think it's natural at all. I think it's a nurture thing. I think it's a growth thing. I think it's what I've wired myself to be by default. Because
So when I
like
guess default is the word, that natural.
Yeah, default.
Natural and default for me in this concept are equivalent words. Natural means
Okay.
unconscious, unconsciously guided, meaning
I can see that.
reaction, your pure reaction.
Natural state.
Your
My natural state.
All of those mean the same thing in this context. Very good. So in the future, I'll make
But
sure
do you also understand why?
I need to make an editor's note. So put all of these definitions in the editing room, put all of these definitions on a note card, and put them at the beginning of the lecture, so that when I use the word natural state, it will be known ahead of time that this is a potential fork in the road. Then here's the map. So, okay, editing note over. Tony, what did you have? Nope, Tony's gone. All right, so he's back. Oh, the Almond Joy conversion.
Nope, I'm following. It was the next turn's kid with the toy. But
Okay.
But yeah, we got some definitions, we got some mapping, we got the Tony's equivalent of Tom's tiny tools for his not zero, not one, the vast scale between 0 and 0.1.
If it's not 0, I can find it. That's my belief. So that's why I need to know what the difference is. Is it 0 or is it not 0? If it's not 0, I can find it.
Yep, and for me, that's the difference in weaponized ignorance and indifference.
And you don't tell me if it's not 0 or 0, which is, yes, that's how the weaponized ignorance works. You deny me that measurement, but they always deny the same source.
It's so powerful. Like I try to teach
everybody. So what you would need to do is you would need false trails. If you wanted it
it's not to hide, it's to be more honest.
Then you just naturally hide better than anyone I've ever met.
But it's how I believe everybody should be, with the realization that everybody shouldn't be me. So that's another balance of paradigms.
Terrible. Everybody would be alone if everybody was you.
But it's the most honest I can be. It's the best way people should interact and show themselves.
That's the bias, bro. That's the love of the self that is healthy, but so healthy that everyone else should be what you are.
Well, remember, like I said, whenever people talk about people, I always equate that to their people.
Yes.
Whenever I say those same statements, the same thing is true. I'm talking about the people within the Pale Green universe that love and respect each other and are normally introverted. I'm trying to reach out to extroverts too, but natural default, not absolute. Like you can
that. Yes. There's specific nomenclature because most of these ideas were mapped out. Like, this is my theory. This is my educational contribution to the world. This is my research. I'm not God. I'm not infallible. I've done my homework. I've done my homework enough that I think I go through the proper steps to make a case that my reasons for thinking the way that I do is not irrational and insane. The level of detail I go into to make sure that that is very carefully understood. The difference between creative, unorthodox, and irrational is mapped out to the degree that one can reduce their thoughts to a smaller piece of a measurement that they can verify is true, and then reverse engineer true elements all the way back up to their larger idea, taking the time to do the homework and understand it from the inside. That's what I'm talking about. So let's talk about joy, which is the next one. Oh, the Almond Joy conversion.
The noodles that I made you, Mom said, I brought for you.
Here's the Almond Joy conversion. This is a way that we can measure joy relative to each other. So we can measure how many almond joys it would take to equal the amount of joy in a thing. Like, how many almond joys would you need to experience the same amount of joy as a summer's day? And then you answer that question. Well, whatever it is, it's 500 almond joys. I don't know what a good conversion is. I haven't asked myself. I'd have to think about it. But I give you my number. And then the next person can say, really? Because now they can look at the same almond joy and have similar enough taste buds that they can more closely approximate a sense of scale than they could before, because it has a physical size. and a physical experience and a physical response, chemicals, the sugar, etc. All of that releases. And so now they can say, well, that would only be 400 almond joys for me on a summer's to equal the amount of joy on a summer's day. So what you could do if you want to measure the difference between relative joy, convert it to almond joys and say how many almond joys worth of joy that you get from eating one of those would it take to add up and stack to the thing that you're talking about, and put a number to it. Then it becomes a mathematical comparison of scale, if nothing else. Good enough to get an idea of what dynamic you're dealing with. There are better ways to understand things that are more specific, but that will put you in the ballpark fairly quickly. Just a little tip from a guy who's been lost in his mind a bunch. That's a good way to get unlost. So now, finally, we're talking about joy. Well, the same thing, like, when's the last time you felt joy? When's the last time you caused joy? Is that the same thing for you? Or is one more pure than the other? To be the cause of joy is fulfilling. There's a sense of accomplishment that goes with that, like it's deserved. To receive joy with nothing behind it, if there is any part of you that feels you don't deserve what you've just been given, you're going to fight that, whether you like it or not. That's just the way that we only accept the things we believe are true about ourselves, and we throw everything out, whether we know that's going on or not. That's the human journey. So when I talk about joy, can you tell the difference between a joy that was given and the joy that you gave? Well, here they have the different layers of joy. And the joy that's given is on the bitter side, meaning it's transactionary. Now, it's benevolent, it's complicit, it's consensual, it works out well for everyone involved, but it is still transactional, which means it is relying on a structure that exists to prevent fear. If I follow these rules, neither one of us will get cheated. And I'm going to be generous, slightly more than I ought, because I know that always makes it turn out well. It's like tipping your waiter so that you always get good service. But then there's the other kind of joy, the joy which is not conditional. And so on, all the way up to the phoenix is what they say, the unrestrained creative mania. The ability to know that you belong anywhere at full power because you are the intrinsic calcification of yourself. And it doesn't matter where you are because you are you, heart, body, and soul. That is the embodiment of joy. And there's a very specific chi that goes along with that, a very specific body chemistry that goes along with feelings of joy. You feel relief. You get dopamine, you get serotonin, you get oxytocin, which is an opiate. You get DMT, you get all of these things that are very, very nice to experience. And that is what is tied to memories of joy, which is why it is very specific to remember joy that is not transactional. I want to be very clear. Do not remember joy that is transactional because you will be asked to pay the cost again. And the one who paid you the first time to cover that debt exists only in your memory. And what you're doing is putting an invoice twice when you've already been paid once and you're being told no. That is why the memory needs to be non-transactional. The joy cannot be engineered to protect yourself. I did this thing that made everyone have a good time. Would you have had a good time if you weren't in charge? Think about it that way instead. Take away the pride of having had a hand in it. If you can do that, the memory is good enough to use. That is the test. That's a harsh standard, but here's what you need to do to clean up a memory that is currently tainted by that. If you think it's not tainted badly, can I remove that part of myself from the memory? Can I be honest enough to remember the way I would have responded? If you can reach that level of honesty, the body will accept that answer and it will cooperate with you, and you'll learn how to do it better over time. The body communicates with itself in language. And it communicates with itself through consciousness, which means it can evolve, which means a bad try is always better than no try when it comes to doing anything, because you're learning a different way to talk. It's baby babble. It's blah, 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 blah. It's stimulating things that used to not talk. That's why it feels awkward and stupid, and you have stupid hands, and you can't remember, and you fuck up a scale even though you played it 100 times before. That's what's good. You didn't learn the language. You didn't do the stupid talk phase. That's what this is doing. This is what it's trying to access. Okay, so that's the second one, joy. The next one is desire. So this one can be everything from the innocent desire all the way up to the wolf desire to eat and mate with and destroy and everything. The rage of just pure conquest is desire at its peak. The desire to be master of the universe is desire at its strongest form. And desire at a small form would be stepping outside your door and catching a fragrant and pleasant breeze wafting by. And that would also be a type of desire, which has been met in the moment on a very, very small and fleeting scale. But that scale is understood as small, fleeting, and it's accepted as such. So the memory of the moment is pure because you realize as it's happening, this is as good as it gets, and it's everything I could reasonably expect. And so you enjoy that moment, and you then desire that peace and that acceptance. And that's the very bottom scale of desire. So everything from the proper appreciation of a calming breeze on your face to the desire to make and destroy the universes with a thought. That is the scale of desire. And you can experience every one of those states by having the appropriate focus. So desire is concentrated anxiety, which is why people struggle with desire. It's because they struggle with anxiety. To struggle with anxiety is to struggle with desire. One is the counter to the other. So here's how you make that one work. Desire needs to be pure. So you'll find this as a common theme. Your desire cannot be transactional in nature. That's a good phrase to apply to a lot of emotional memories if you're trying to get a baseline for what you reasonably should have understood in the moment. Remember that desire is, if it's transactional, you have to remember that that's what it was, if nothing else. Because then at least you can strip out that part of the bias, but you have to realize it's faith for what it is. So if your desire is transactional, you have to figure out how to make it a type of transaction that people are okay having done. So there needs to be wisdom in chasing these desires, but the way that you access the memory is you don't need to understand the map. You just need to understand, when is the last time I really wanted something? Remember, it's just the rote focus. It's you do the exercise, you get the prize. You push the button, you get the cheese. When was the last time you were focused? What were you focused about? How deeply did that go? What was important? What were you paying attention to? How sharp were your senses? How clear was the goal? How impossible was it for you to fail? How much music was playing in the background? Your survival montage, your Rocky IV training in the mountains, amping up with your playlist on repeat to give you those strong resonant vibes. And how much of that can you remember in the moment And every time you can remember that moment, or remember a time when you remember that moment, you know what's very good for that? Movies. Movies are very good at making you feel things. Very good movies are very good at making you feel things very clearly. When the dog died in Marley and Me, who felt that? I felt that. I don't feel a lot, and I felt that, man. That dog, Marley and Me. But guess what? When I need to understand how sad somebody is, when I need the gift of that perspective, that is the thing that can help you slow down. Joy is the gas. Anger is the fuel. Desire is the direction. Sorrow is the brakes. To reject the chi of sorrow is to lose the ability to regulate, which means your machine will explode. And you'll only be able to use fire chi, which is angry. Okay? Metal chi and fire chi don't get along unless you do it right. There's a way to cheat the system. If you mix the water, you can get a strengthening effect instead. That's how forging works. So let's talk about sorrow. Somebody is having their worst day. And that somebody is not you. And that person is in front of you. And you're about ready to say some stupid shit like, well, it's going to be for the best. Or I'm going to keep you in my thoughts and prayers. Or, well, just keep your chin up there, bucko, because why? Because you haven't trained for this properly and you're failing in the moment. At the core of it, really. No, here's the way to be prepared for that situation. Remember who you're talking to. Don't remember who you are. You'll always know who you are. You don't need to remember who you are. You know. Remember who you're talking to. So, when that happens, this person is at their worst day. So I remember who I'm talking to, and I imagine myself at my worst day. And now I bring that memory into my mind, and I flood my body with all of the depressive chemicals, the things that lower my senses, the things that cloud my mind with indifference. I bring all of that on purpose. And then I listen to him. And I hear the echo that he does when he says, hello, or thanks for coming. I hear his echo. And that's how you have to match the sadness of the room when the room is sad. You have to be inside that sadness prospectively so that you don't use extrasensory information that would not be present to you in a more sad state of mind. You create feedback because your frequency is not adjusting to the frequency of the song. That's the value of sadness. Somebody then says this to me, and instead of responding to their question, I just say, there's nothing, man, that would make any of this go away. And I'm here for you until that doesn't feel like it's just true anymore. And he would feel that without feeling condescended to, without feeling like he is been given something that he doesn't have access to use. I found something within his domain that he currently can see and understand, that he could pick up and use as a tool of comfort. And because I was willing to reduce the frame of mind to the amount of sadness in the room, I was able to identify a tool they could reach. So that is the value of sorrow and having that. And the physical effect is you do not have to be sad to experience the chemical effects of being sad. Your sad chemicals actually are designed to help you try and feel better. They're designed to help you feel more calm. So if you have the courage to experience sad memories enough that you can map the experience of the emotional journey, you will find that from the perspective that is objective, the adjustments being made within the body are positive, calming. That is the secret to lowering blood pressure. That is the secret to controlling heart rate, is the ability to use the absolute calming nature of pure sadness, which is why, again, I will say your sadness memory for accessing this chi cannot be transactional. Your sadness cannot be tied to anyone else. Your sadness cannot be someone else's fault. That is not pure sadness. That is sadness mixed with resentment, sadness mixed with anger, sadness mixed with anything if it is tied to someone else, because there was a lack of expectation. So that is incompatible with accessing this part, because that is not what triggers it. You will get a different chemical response. I'm saying these are different requests from the body's perspective. So to get the result you want, which is the calming effect, that is the way that you have to slice it with the phrasing. So more or less, the sorrow has to be pure. It just the dog in Marley and Me. I hate to go to that well, but that is cinematically one of the most pure examples of sorrow that you can point to. And if you can watch that movie on repeat enough times to experience that emotion, and you can deal with whatever unpacking of trauma that goes along with that sorrow, like if you can step yourself away from your sorrow in the moment to understand your understanding of the sorrow as a greater whole, like why does it make me sad? Why does it do this? And then you can ride that wave from the outside and the inside. Then you can learn to reproduce it, because that's what's required, by the way, to reproduce a feeling on purpose. Okay? Feelings are like
I've
weapons.
never seen Marley and Me, but I figure it's equivalent to the dog from I Am Legend or any other character that the cinematic universe presents an emotional connection to and then kills off.
Yep. The innocent thing that dies through no fault of its own, that everybody loved, that is the thing. The death of innocence is the one that is most deeply felt when it comes to that. So anyways, when I'm talking about the sadness, when you can reach that state where you understand the emotional journey, you can strip away the incumbent sadness, which means if your sorrow is not transactional, you don't have to pay the cost every time you go back. That's why you can't do it that way, because you will always get a negative return. So you have to remember that these memories of sorrow do not mean you have to experience the sorrow. It only means that your body can respond to what it felt like to experience that sorrow. You can strip that pain out. And that is how. So you're not going to get it right at first, because this is easy to say, it takes a while to master. But if you practice it, you'll teach yourself the language of this. And for sorrow, that is a good one, because many people leave that one alone. I don't want to feel bad. I don't want to slow down. I don't want to change my frequency to something that is not super high intensity. But if you think about wave functions in general, super high intensity wavelengths are very disrupted disruptive to harmonies unless they are used unless they are used predictably and formulaically, so that, like, you can't just put a high frequency blast anywhere in a song. It has to do its job and play its part. If it goes places where it doesn't belong, it creates supreme discordance. And because it's a very high frequency, it really stands out. So what that means is you have to be able to remove those high frequencies for certain situations, because the situation is not compatible with a frequency that high. It's a totally different spectrum, totally different point of measurement. The whole subjective experience is so far removed from those frequencies that if an adjustment isn't made, hostility is the guaranteed result. That's the only point I'm making. Is you can measure that you're too far away to use a specific approach, or you can measure distance in a way that's too far away to use a specific approach. Anger and joy and desire; those are the airplanes of emotional travel, and sorrow is like walking, and fear is driving a car, which is the next one. So fear is the other one. Depends what flavor of fear you've got. Like, are you afraid for yourself? Or are you afraid for something else? That's a big difference. Your fear cannot be selfish in nature for you to get the benefit from it. I'm going to repeat that. Your fear cannot be selfish in nature for you to get the emotional benefit I'm talking about, specifically with this emotional switchboard. So I'm talking about a very specific kind of fear. This is an undirected fear. This is conflict with the unknown. And that's a difficult thing to find. So I'm going to tell you how to narrow your search parameters, which is why I say your fear cannot be selfish if you're going to find it easily. Things that you care about because of other people that make you afraid. That's the ballpark. So maybe you could find something. Were you ever afraid for your kid because you love them? Was your fear motivated by love? That's the real test. If your fear was motivated by love, you understand how to strip away the pieces of fear that can be used chemically to enhance yourself without paying the cost. So that's the split there is your fear needs to have no target, no moral objection. Your fear is allowed to exist as a useful and beneficial state without necessity to remove, circumvent, limit, or retard. That's what I mean about that type of fear. So if your fear is selfish, one of the most selfish and common occurrences regarding fear is the I don't want to ever be afraid. I'm afraid of being afraid. I don't want to do it. So I'm not going to let it happen. No, stop. You're making me afraid. No, I don't like it. How are you doing? Stop bothering me. Stop saying those things. Why are you turning against me? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. If you've ever heard examples of that. So when I talk about fear, I talk about what fear does when it's not for you. When fear is for you, you only care about you, which means you need to decide what to do. Well, if you're not a decisive creature, specifically if you don't know what you want, you might freeze. Or if you're specifically angry, or you think that a direct approach is usually the best response, it might make you dive head first. Or if you're a scared person, you might decide withdrawal is the best answer. Well, all of those are not fear. Those are reactions to fear. So those aren't the right way. That's not the thing that's being used. This is beneath that, which pushes those. These are the rationalizations that appear from the primary focus behind it. So the way you strip away the rationalizations is you make your rationalization simpler. That thing is going to hurt something I love, and I have no power to stop it. So fear at its core, to access it, is a proper measure of your true power. You want to strip everything from it. how much control do you really have? And that's the objective measurement versus how much control there is to be had. How much do you have currently? And how do you feel about that? So how much control do you have objectively is the scale. When that number gets low, how does that make you feel in terms of how okay you are? That is how you calibrate and measure your fear. If you're having a hard time with it, that could take practice. How much power do I really have? How okay am I as my power becomes less? And if you want to test the limits of fear, test the limits of how much power you can remove. How much fear would there be if you were about to lose, say, your ability to see? Well, okay, maybe that's one limit. Now you're going to lose your ability to see because your eyes are going to get carved out with a spoon. Well, that's a different kind of fear. And you could go down that path and say, which one of these different vibrations can I create before I am willing to say, I'm just fucking scared. Like, where is your zero moment? Where's your zero become not zero? You got to bottom out. And now, because you recognize how to link that objectively to control, and you can change your level of what you think control is, you can bottom out your fear and you can max it out to figure out what your current range is. And once you have that, then you realize what the appropriate level of fear is for the information you've had. Not in terms of can you tell the future, but how are you calibrating yourself mathematically in this moment relative to what's going on in the world? Like, you measure your bias accurately. And so that is the chi of fear, which is really the chi of incredible focus. So focus is impossible without a proper understanding of fear. So the way that you would practice that is to do that. I have to actually leave on time today. I have another call scheduled and we are at time.
I've got to take the
one
kids to a
question.
babysitter before choir myself.
All right.
Oh, that's weird as hell.
So I got time for one question if you have any.
Nope, no questions. No questions. Hopefully next week I'll be able to take notes. Oh, hip hop, nothing to do with the lecture. Are
Okay.
you are you aware of hip hop's musicality and do you appreciate it?
Like,
Ken talks about it, but I don't think you have.
yeah. No, I don't know very much. Like, all of the hip hop that I listen to, and I don't even know if this qualifies as hip hop, so I might be revealing a bias of ignorance just by the way I've already about to define things. Is I liked Eminem because I felt like I could connect with him. Like, I felt like he wasn't yelling at me. I felt like he was yelling properly. And that's what I liked about Eminem, is his anger was properly focused, in my opinion. And there were other people who probably did it better, but his was always like, his anger was never wrong. Whenever I listened to him, his anger was always right. And that was my draw to Eminem, and I think to a lot of other people. So when I look at hip hop in general, like, that purity of expression is the way that I measure the gold standard. So there are other ways to measure the gold standard, such as production value, message, presentation. Maybe a certain bias is favored and glorified to explore because that's how you can view that sort of thing to explore. You blow it up, you make it bigger so you can look at it. So that's a different goal. But the thing that I always valued of that genre in general was how it tried to point aggression in places that were fair. And so when I looked at, again, Eminem, he was a very strong example. Like, I could get as much of that as I wanted from him without ever having to turn the channel because he never missed a beat on that one single front. So that's my understanding of hip hop. Now you can tell me how the different perspectives that I'm aware that I don't have.
I'll take that. I mean, tonight's going to be a discussion about an album, so it's going to go a little bit deeper than Eminem and anger because his hip hop was less
social awareness and
Okay.
more entertainment. And tonight's hip hop is going to be focused on Kendrick Lamar's new album, which is getting a lot of negative reviews because it's performative hip hop. Not performative. It's a woke hip hop. It's a social justice. It's a lot of what Tupac did. It's father time, and it's not the
So
normal.
is it purely motivated or is it judgmentally toned? Is it condemning as it
Purely
lyricizes?
motivated.
Is
I
it
think some
labeling-
people feel attacked by it.
Is it calling certain
that's not the
behaviors or
purpose.
groups or people which would easily be identifiable as sides in a war, certain derogatory things like, oh, you anti-gay motherfuckers, you know, like that sort of thing? If
I'm
it's
sure it's
aggressive in tone,
designed
then I
to.
can see why it would flop.
I'm sure it's designed to, but for me it didn't, and it wasn't recommended to me for that purpose. However, the very first track got my attention because he's talking about fucking this white bitch and fucking this white bitch and fucking this white bitch. I'm just like, really? Okay, I'll listen to it.
That guy likes fucking white bitches, I guess.
Well, I didn't
So
even
much he
catch
wrote a
what the
song
lyrics
about it,
were. I didn't even catch what the whole lyrics were. I got to
That
listen to
behavior
it
by
again
itself
before tonight.
that's more interesting than the lyrics of the song. Like, that was your identity to such a degree that you wrote a song about it. Like, you put craft into that.
It's not the first one. Stop.
I'm
It's
just
not the
saying,
first
it's
one.
got more parentage and more
Shoes on.
genetic,
Shoes on.
like
River's
the
House.
good idea has more parentage than some of the other ones, which are less well thought out. Like, that one's been stewing around for a while. So anyways, I hope that the secrets of accessing chi without going to a monastery were useful. If you learn to do it, or if you already do a version of it, I think you could do better at it than I can, because the volume knob is ego, and you can vibe stronger than I can. I just am really good at harmonics.
I think that one of the things that, so whenever I talk about one of the books about Eastern philosophy, I think is the best way to put it, that I've experienced, I always remember something else that influenced that, or I always seem to be digging back to an earlier source. So instead of quoting this as like the first or anything like that, I'll just say that the game of life kind of primed me for a lot, but the Tao, I think, started by saying the problem with teaching. And that's exactly what you just said about ego. The Tao talks about how, the Tao Te Ching talks about how the teacher is pointing at the moon, trying to get their student to look at the moon, but the student just ends up looking at the teacher's finger.
Yeah.
And that was a really powerful analogy because that's exactly how I feel about Peyoga. Peyoga is, and that's part of the reason I won't define it, because as long as I don't define it, then it can't be about me. It can be password protected until I know what it is and I'm willing to share it more.
Peyoga can never get better until you're willing to say why it's not good enough.
Oh, that's a lie.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
That's a lie.
Like, you can measure not good enough relative, but if your ability to do good changes in the future,
We got to just try it.
then
Yeah,
that
but
measurement is where you're going from where to where you are. So if that movement increases 1 iota, your potential for good increases 1 iota, then that's one way to find it reliably. Just assume you already don't have it and seek to improve it, because like from a temporal perspective, if you measure yourself against the future, you got the calibration done exactly right. Hey Ben, what's up? Just wrapping up here.
all right, I'm out. You can catch him up. Oh.
All right, let me turn the recording off here. So Ben, you don't have to, this is not part of the lecture series, so stop recording.